I had no idea what I was doing when I negotiated buying that property, and it ended up saving us almost $60,000 on the purchase price.
Like that.
I put a poll out on Instagram a few weeks ago, and the overwhelming majority agreed with me that their biggest challenge with finding a property is that things are just so dang expensive right now. I mentioned recently in a video that I did about how to afford homesteading that we have bought the majority of our properties off market. If you missed that video, I'll put a link below to it, but just to reiterate what I mean by off market properties, if you are in the United States, like 80 to 90% of houses that are sold are done through what's called the MLS. And that is where somebody gets a realtor, the realtor is in charge of taking the pictures, marketing it online for you, scheduling the showing, writing the contracts, all of that. So when I say that we bought our properties off market, I mean that we are buying them off of the MLS. Some of the properties were offered for sale by owner, but a lot of them weren't even that. I had an overwhelming response in that video to do a little bit of a deeper dive into how to find off-market properties, because one of the biggest advantages to buying a property off-market for us has been that it has allowed us to get them for a significant discount. I'm talking we've probably saved over $200,000 buying them this way versus the traditional method off of the MLS. I do want to say though, buying off market doesn't just potentially save you literally tens of thousands of dollars. It also significantly reduces the competition for a property. When something's listed with a realtor, the goal is to maximize the amount of people that can see it. The MLS is a huge database. When you are buying off market and you are finding these properties yourself, nobody else knows about them. I'm going to talk about how exactly do you find these properties. Then I'm also going to talk about even more important element of how do you negotiate with the seller to actually be able to buy the property. But before I get into that, there are a few things that you need to understand.
Like that.
The most common assumption that people have when I talk about the potential of finding off-market properties that they don't actually exist. A lot of people think that if somebody wanted to sell, they would just have it listed with a realtor, but that's not true. There's a lot of reasons why somebody wouldn't be listed for sale with a realtor, even if they did want to sell. The first reason for that is that they don't like realtors. Sometimes it's because they had a bad experience with a realtor in the past. Other reasons are because they just think that they can save money by not having to pay the commission. Now, for full transparency, I think that realtors actually earn every single cent that they make. And the data really does show that listing with a realtor does often translate to a higher sale price. But that's just my opinion. The other reason why people might be willing to sell their property but not be listed is because they have an attachment to their property. I actually relate to this one a lot because the typical process for buying or selling a property in America today is very detached. The buyer and seller don't interact in any way. I do get why it's structured that way, but at the same time, I kind of hate it. I want to feel good about the family that I am selling a property that I've worked really hard on. In a sense, it kind of helps me to let it go easier. And there are a lot of other sellers that want to be able to meet their potential buyers, kind of vet them to see if they even want to sell the property to them. From a more practical stance though, having a relationship with a buyer really allows you to just kind of give them a heads up on any quirks or specific things that the property has, like how to winterize this water line, or hey, that random light switch actually turns off the outlet over there. The third reason why somebody might be willing to sell their property but not be listed with a realtor is because their timeline is hazy. This was actually the case with two of the properties that we pursued off market. In one circumstance, the seller was building a house and it wasn't going to be done for several months, and they didn't want to officially show it or offer it to anybody until they were totally moved out, which, as it turns out, ended up being 8 months after I had initially found out about the property. I'll talk a little bit more about timelines later in this video when I go into the negotiation aspect of buying a property. Okay, now let's get into the meat of it. How do you find these properties? I'll give you a quick rundown of how we have found our 4 homesteading properties. because they've actually all been found a different way. And then I'll also give you some other options of ways that you can find property. So I'm going to share my numbers for some of the properties. I'm not going to share the numbers for all of them, either just for privacy purposes or because they're properties that we currently own and don't have the alternative numbers on yet. But just to give you guys an idea of the potential here saving wise. So our first property that we found, it was 37.5 acres, and we purchased that property in 2015, and we actually found that one on. I just want to mention this real quick for those of you that might not make it to the end of this video where I talk about this, but there's a lot to talk about when it comes to buying homestead properties. And I realized that if I'm really going to help you guys do this, it probably would be beneficial to create some type of resource that you can actually take with you. In the description, I will put a link to download a free list that is kind of the 6 steps that it takes to buying an off-market homesteading property. Full disclosure, when you download that list, I will put you into an email series that I'm writing that kind of expands more on some of the topics I mentioned in this video. So I will be sending you a few emails that go in a little bit deeper into what to say to a potential seller when you talk to them for the very first time, how to negotiate the price to what is an actual fair number based on the market and the property situation. A few more other things that are way too much to say in one quick YouTube video. So if you're interested in learning more and you want a tangible resource to kind of help guide you, check out a link in the description of this video. So our first property that we found, it was 37.5 acres, and we purchased that property in 2015, and we actually found that one on Craigslist. It was listed for sale by owner. It was an older couple that was moving out of state, and we paid $150,000 for that property. 2.5 years later, we ended up selling it for $215,000. We did do a little bit of work finishing out the basement, but there weren't any major repairs that we done, so we definitely bought it under value and made a good profit off of it. Second property I actually found, it was briefly listed on Facebook for sale by owner, meaning like a couple days, and I just happened to see it at the time. Contacted the seller, and then they removed the listing, and it turns out they weren't quite ready to sell yet. A few months later, because I still had their contact information in my Messenger app, I reached out to them again to see if they were getting closer to be able to sell, and at that point they were willing to have a conversation and let us come and see the property. We ended up purchasing that 5-acre homestead, where I am right now, for $166,000. A year later, we refinanced the property and it appraised at about $215,000. That was before we had really done much work to it. We had cleaned up a lot. We had started to work on the barn. And of course, the market did change a little bit, but we had a lot of equity really quick with this place. The third property we bought, which is the 10-acre homestead where we're currently living, was actually one that the seller reached out to me and wondered if I would be interested in either buying or helping them find somebody that wanted to buy the property. I had no idea who she was. We weren't friends, though I did find out later we do have some mutual acquaintances. But the reason why she reached out to me on Facebook was because I had put posts in a couple different Facebook groups locally saying that we were looking for more land to purchase. Do not underestimate the value of getting the word out there that you are looking. Sometimes it takes months or even years, but if you can plant the seed in people's minds of like, oh, I think that's something that that person would be interested in, or they mentioned they were looking for it at one point, it makes a huge difference. Now, I'm not going to give numbers for our current place, but it appraised for $80,000 more than what we purchased it for last fall. Our newest property, the 40-acre property, I actually found through a local realtor that had it as what I would call a pocket listing. And what a pocket listing is basically, it's a property that a realtor knows is available, but they don't have it formally on the MLS. And sometimes they're advertising it, sometimes they're not, and it's just kind of through the grapevine. And this realtor had posted about it once on Facebook, but she had signs near the property that I saw, and that is how I got in contact with her. So far I've talked about for sale by owner on Craigslist or Facebook or even forsalebyowner.com as places you need to be looking for properties. I've also talked about just putting it out there, spreading the word and letting people know on social media, letting people know, acquaintances to you, what you're looking for so that they can keep their ears peeled too and let you know if they find anything. third one is to connect with local realtors. I absolutely recommend reaching out to realtors and letting them know what you are looking for so that if they catch wind of somebody considering selling or they have any type of pocket listings, you can have first dibs, hopefully, to get in on it. Now, two other options that I haven't mentioned yet that I think are super valuable. Number one is to do what's called driving for dollars. Literally driving in the general area you are hoping to find a homestead property and just seeing if there's anything that you want to start researching further. If there's a property that looks like it would fit what your criteria is for a homestead, get the address and make a note for it. I'm creating a new program that's going to dive all into how to research these properties that you're potentially interested in. After you do your research and you decide if it's a good candidate or not, the next thing is that you need to contact the current owner. I have templates in my program of the exact letters and text messages that I've used to contact the owners of properties to see if they would be interested in selling. I don't recommend going to a property and knocking on their door and saying, "Hey, do you want to sell your house to me?" I think sending a letter, even though it seems kind of old-fashioned, it's a lot less invasive. It gives people all the information there that they can review and they don't have to try to recall details. You can give them contact information and they can more digest the information on their timeline versus having to decide face-to-face in a scenario where you are just knocking on their door. There is a property that we were actually really seriously pursuing earlier this year. It's the one that got away for various reasons. But we initially contacted them through a letter. And after we sent that letter, we texted for a while. They allowed us to come and see the property. We could figure out if it was actually what we thought it was going to be and work for us. And that's how the relationship started. I'm working on putting together a handbook that's going to explain a little bit deeper on how to research and find information of the property, how to find exactly how much acreage it is, how to find out what it's really worth market-wise, who the owner is, what their contact information is, and all of that information. Okay, last but not least, let's talk about how do you negotiate to buy a property once you find it and you're in contact with the owner. The first key to negotiating is you need to understand what are their core motivations for selling. Everybody has different motivations to sell. Do not just assume that everybody wants to get the absolute maximum dollar amount for their property. Most common motivations for people to sell are have some type of family trouble, have a job change that's going to move them out of the area. Sometimes people's core motivation is that they're just overwhelmed with their current property. Sometimes people's core motivation is that they have a really tight time for when they need to get their property sold. Your goal from the very first time you talk to this potential seller is to figure out what their scenario is. Learn as much as possible as you can about their situation and about their core motivations. And I want to be clear, you are not doing this so that you can manipulate them. You are learning about their situation so that you can kind of structure your offer to them in a way that is going to help whatever their scenario is. If somebody has to sell their house within 30 days so that they can move to another state to take care of a ailing parent, giving them $30,000 more is not going to solve their problem if it's going to take 60 days for you to close on the property. Their core motivation is time, not money. Sometimes the seller's core motivation is that they don't want to have to do anything to the property before they move out. They don't want to have to clean it. They don't want to have to fix anything up. So if you are somebody that is willing to take on the task of taking a property 100% as is, you can know to emphasize that in your offer to them and let them know they can leave it exactly as they have to. They don't have to clean it up even. Before you even start actually looking at properties as a buyer, you really should think about what are your key assets or ways that you can maximize your value as a buyer to help somebody that may be potentially wanting to sell their property. Do you have a mortgage lender who can work super quickly and close in 2 weeks or 30 days? Are you willing to rent a dumpster and do some cleanup and take care of a bit of a mess? Are you flexible on timeline? Or maybe not having to sell another property before you can buy theirs. The sale of a property should be a mutual beneficial transaction between both the buyer and the seller. Both parties will have to compromise, but knowing what the seller's core motivation is, and also what's your motivation too, is a really important aspect when you're looking for a deal. Once you learn what the seller's core motivation is for selling, you really need to do a market analysis of the property to figure out what its current value is. From there, what I will do is that I will deduct certain things from that current market value based on what I am offering. So for example, if a property is truly worth $400,000, but I am offering to buy it from them and they don't have to pay any realtor fees, that is typically around 6% of the sale price, meaning for a $400,000 property, that's going to save them almost $25,000. So that puts me down to a $375 value. There are at least a dozen different things that I would deduct depending on the scenario and the property itself to get it down to be what's going to be my final offer that's fair for both parties. And again, I am making a whole template that you can use to determine for a specific property what it should be worth that's fair based on the scenario and the current market value, but then also fair based on what you are willing to risk buying it in the state that it's in the circumstances that you're given. Next element to negotiating that I'm going to share today before I wrap this up is share your story with the seller. This is something that I think is a huge value to buying off-market properties because in recent years, they've changed the rules on how you can negotiate buying a property when it's listed on the MLS. And part of those rules are that you can't tell a buyer your story because it will create bias from other offers. But that doesn't apply when you're buying off-market. You can share your story with the seller, let them know what your intentions are, let them know what your family is like, let them know what your goals are, which is really important, I think. Again, for somebody that is selling their property, they want to know that they're selling it to somebody who they feel is going to take care of it. I know that this has been kind of a fire hose of information, so I'm going to cut it off at that. I have a lot more to share, though, about buying off-market properties, you guys. I'm going to put a link in the description of this video to a free checklist, which is the 6 things you need to do in order to buy an off-market homestead property. If you want to download that list for free, go ahead and check out the link in the description, and I'll talk to you guys more next week.